very powerful thought to leave out on. And I think it transitions us into the next panel well. So yeah, thank you. Production here, what's our next?
Thank you for having me.
All right, so next up, we're going to have a co-hosted panel with myself and Beta. We're going to be discussing the South as the heart of American capital. So yeah, Beta, I'll let you kind of kick things off here.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you to Nate for your stream of consciousness. It was beautiful to listen to, just to see the historical connections. And one of the things that we're doing in this last panel, right, is we're talking about the South as the heart of American capital. So what DT and I are going to be doing is we're actually going to be kind of trying to wrap up and synthesizing all of the previous commentators and panelists, because I don't know if you guys can tell that there's a theme throughout this entire process, right? And the theme is that we have a global universal struggle. Mm-hmm. That global universal struggle is rooted in exploitation, and that exploitation affects all humans to different degrees, and that exploitation can only be changed by reversing the same methods of exploitation that exploited us, right? So we're hearing a lot of things, right? So we're trying to pull a lot of our speakers. If you notice our speakers, we have queer speakers, we have Black speakers, we have femme speakers, we have brown speakers. We're gonna keep doing this, and we're gonna expand this more. We talked about the South, we talked about colonization, we talked about the globalism, we talked about it all, right? The reason why we're doing that is because we want to show everyone who's listening that this is a universal struggle. And that universal struggle means that we have, okay, so there are more of us than there are of the capitalist class.
Okay.
They won by being out-organizing us. But if we out-organize them, we win every effing time, every time. And so part of that is coming to understanding. And so if you notice the global struggle, right, and like going all the way back to Christina's talk and Basil and Cole's talk, their talk, and Aaron's talk about propaganda. I want you to see this, and then Nate's talk about how Memphis and Tennessee was created, right? Like this tri-state area. The first thing I want you to hear is that, going full circle, is that we are very powerful as Southerners. Memphis is the epicenter of the 3 poor states in the Union. Memphis is the capital of North Mississippi, right? Like it's the cultural capital. All the beauty and the pain and the angst and the power of the Mississippi Delta coalesces right here in this area, right? The artists come here to make art, right? I confirmed with our resident historian, Christina, to make sure, is that like Robert Church, the person who became the millionaire, did so because after the yellow fever epidemic, it wiped out the ruling class of Memphis, and they actually moved to Atlanta because Memphis and Atlanta were always competing against each other. And so do you know who the two groups of people who re-inhabited Memphis, right? They were freed Black men and Irish indentured poor white trash people, right? So the 2 most oppressed humans of the South coalesced right here in Memphis, right? And so one of the things that we need to own as revolutionaries is the power of this region and the power of the propaganda of this region to keep us from not working together.
Big fact. So I really want to hop in right there, especially thinking about the Black freedmen and the poor Irish working class, right, that established the area. And also the power of propaganda. Because one of the things that the bourgeoisie class has designed to split that particular, that very specific union of working class people, right? Is this idea that Irish slavery, which was essentially a wage slavery, was equal to chattel slavery, which the kidnapped Africans were put under in this country. And not only were they the same, but through just sheer virtue of hard work and stick-to-itiveness, right? The Irish population of America were able to escape and elevate themselves above that, as opposed to, you know, being able to essentially become class traders by cashing in on their whiteness to become white Americans. So, and I don't say that to condemn or criticize, you know, working class white people or Irish descendant people or anything of that nature, but to show the importance of our unity and us staying together to compel these sort of myths that hold us all back. Because essentially, no matter how much you think about the difference between escaping Irish slavery and the condition that Black Americans face, materially, we're all in the same boat as working class people. Intersectionality comes in and shows us that Black people just on top of that have to deal with anti-Blackness. But as comrades in this proletariat revolution, that's something you can use your comfort, because, you know, privilege is watered down, right? So that's something you can use your comfort in not having to deal with anti-Blackness in order to help shield your comrades and come together. And receive criticism and grace, right? So yeah, that's.
I wanted to jump back, and also to the person who lost their, and they anglicized their name. Exactly. The person who said that, they lost their past tense and anglicized their name, right? They did do that, and it was all a cultural. So someone referred to the Punisher, Aaron, they referred to it in their previous thing. So if you look at the data of when the Punisher was produced, when the Punisher was it was in 1979. So if you know anything about the Second Great Migration in U.S. history, that was when Italian Americans, Polish Americans, Jewish Americans, Russian Americans kind of did the second immigration, right? And so when they first came to the United States, they were not allowed into whiteness, right? In a conversation DT and I talked about, he's like, if you're not a WASP, guess what? You weren't allowed in the right. And so what happened is that right around the time of the 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, Italians were actually assimilating into whiteness, which is why The Godfather is such an important movie and the books are so important, because you can actually see this assimilation happening, right? That's why the unions had to go to the mafia to get whatever, because they were trying to, like, they were already outside of the cultural norms, right? So all that being said is the Punisher, being a Sicilian American, created at that time to establish whiteness, right, is once again another layer of propaganda, right? Because it's right around that time that Sicilian Americans were assimilating into whiteness, right? And that's why the narrative and the propaganda of Christopher Columbus is so heinous, right? Because that's what Italian Americans used to be like, your first colonizer was one of us, right? And so not negating any of like the horrible things that happen, but just understanding how narrativization and colonization works. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we're like, to give further context of how this plays out, right? So it's not an issue of sameness. It's not the issue of that. There are absolutely differences of repression by degree, and sometimes those degrees change category, right? But that doesn't mean that, like, going full circle, that's what Fred Hampton did, right? Fred Hampton understood that degree. And that's also why James Baldwin, when he comes into the scene and he talks about his liberation struggle as a queer Black human, was like, I literally have the power to shake the empire to its core because I'm in the empire. And when I look up, I make the empire tremble because of the power. Because going full circle, what DT said is that when that person looks up their head and affects the empire because of where they are in that empire, they can literally shake the fabric of the foundation.
Yes,
so want to root in the previous conversations?
So speaking to degrees of difference, right, and just kind of varying degrees of oppression, and tying that to also being able to buy into whiteness, right? Like this concept that's kind of where Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Jewish American, anybody that weren't WASP, right? How they were able to buy into whiteness. You see, and it's all made up. It's nothing, right? Like it's stuff that they created to base their system of oppression on. And it didn't start with the American Project, right? This is speaking to our international struggle. I mentioned the podcast earlier that we did with Dash, and I'll try to link it in the chat for anybody who wants to check it out. One of the things that she talked about was how when the Crusades happened and Latin America was colonized, essentially, they had basically certificates of whiteness, right? And it was if you could prove that for 5 generations, you know, your parents were white, were Christian. I'm sorry, they were Christian. They were Catholic, which was code for white. Then you were considered white. And it's the same thing with chattel slavery and the 1-drop rule, right? And kind of the inverse, where the closer you are to lighter you are, the more light-skinned you are, the more privilege you have, the less strenuous work you have. You're still enslaved, but it gives you a level of comfort that's not afforded to your comrades that are in the same struggle. That can create the type of division that's needed to create like a petty bourgeoisie, right? Like a microcosm of that. Mm-hmm. And to give a contemporary example, you honestly see the same thing in places like Memphis or Atlanta, still, where you have this kind of Black wealth, right? This Black middle class that's able to have a certain comfort in separation for more, I hate low income, so I'll say communities devoid of opportunity, right? And other communities devoid of support that are systemically ignored and disenfranchised. And they're able to kind of ignore that, right? Or be separated from it or buy into the bootstrap illusion, despite the fact that Dr. King post, the real Dr. King said it's a cruel jest to ask a man with no boots to pull himself up by the bootstraps. And that was just a really long-winded way to say that our struggle, again, as working class people, one is to recognize that it's global, that we're far from a localized struggle, to recognize your place in the empire and what positions of comfort you have, what oppressions that you don't personally directly face, that you're not on the front lines for. And recognize kind of that the dividers and the degree of oppression between us is bullshit. It doesn't matter. If any of us are oppressed a bit, then all of us are oppressed totally. And that's about all I got to say about that.
So as you can see, we're tying this whole narrative of propaganda, of globalism, of housing struggle, land and bread, the narrative of Black Lives Matter, the Rainbow Coalition, all of this we're bringing, and oh.
My bad, real quick, because I saw in the chat and I don't want to forget. So someone mentioned how their grandparents anglicized their name when they immigrated from Sweden during World War II. So a fun bit of trivia, I think still today, or the last time the survey was conducted anyway, the most common last name for African Americans, specifically descendants of American chattel slavery, is Washington. Which, people took after George Washington as the first president, a symbol of freedom and a personification of that, right? But because they're Black, they're not able to still have the same assimilation into whiteness simply by having an anglicized name, which most of us have anyway for various reasons. So again, it just goes to show these, all of our barriers to upward mobility or to be closer essentially to the bourgeois class are not the same, which is why we need to dismantle all of them.
Yep. So as you can see, we're like pulling this. So like DT alluded to, Memphis is the coalesce of the three poor states of the Union, right? So like, which is Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee, right? And so, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Memphis, and then I want to broaden it into like the South a little bit. So Memphis, okay, so one of the things that you need to know is that Memphis is literally the gateway. So the Delta still is the #1 agricultural hub in the United States. So the Delta actually feeds the rest of the country. I double checked this facts because at first I was like, oh, is it Indiana, Iowa, you know, those kind of like Midwestern states, but that's not actually the case. It's still the Delta. Because while the Midwestern states do corn and soybean, they don't typically do made foods that are like those corn and soybeans actually go to processing plants, and those processing plants put them in like granaries, and they're used for several different things. But like as far as produce, it's still the Delta. And so that was very interesting to me, even though we have huge supply chains that are coming from Mexico and all over. If it's grown in the United States, to be consumed in the United States, it's the Delta, and it still comes through Memphis. So that's another thing, is that Memphis is a distribution hub, right? So I'm gonna read some names of some things that I want you to hear. So we have Nike, we have International Paper, we have FedEx and Amazon, we have AutoZone, we have ServiceMaster, we have Smith & Nephew, and we have Medtronic. All of these corporations are multi-billion dollar sources. So that plays into play specifically, and then obviously with FedEx and Amazon, those are distribution, so multi-million-dollar corporations, and then 2 specific distribution hubs, right? So at the same time that we have all these corporations making millions, if not billions of dollars, right? At the same component, we have nonprofit organizations. And like we have more nonprofits in Memphis per capita than any other city in the country, right? And the average Memphian makes $10 a day, right? So why is it that if we have multiple multi-million-dollar corporations, and we also have this huge nonprofit complex, which we'll go shortly to explain the difference between nonprofit/charity and mutual aid and how that plays into this. But one of the things that we need to talk about is that why is there such a disparate interaction between the wealthy and the poor in Memphis? And that is because Memphis is a microcosm of North Mississippi, and Mississippi is a microcosm of the United States. And so the exploitation that you see in this particular city, in this particular region, is deeply indicative of the exploitation that is going on around the entire country. And literally all that changes, like, so if you go to the Southwest, it switches up and it's Latin American humans who are in those places, right? Or if you go into other regions of the country, specifically if you go to the Pacific Northwest where a lot of indigenous humans are, or in Oklahoma where a lot of the diaspora of indigenous people through the Trail of Tears are, you'll find it gets switched up. But the same concepts and the same things that we're working with are like right here, and it plays out just the exact same way.
Yep. So to that point, about Mississippi being a microcosm of America, right? It goes very far. Mississippi specifically, much like you mentioned, Memphis, right, has more nonprofits per capita. Mississippi has more millionaires per capita than any other state, and is also the poorest state in the union. Which is a direct, correlation to the 1% and the rest of us. When you look at this type of divide, Mississippi is also 40% Black, despite having I think 98% white legislature. It's also mostly working class, despite having a GOP-controlled governmental structure that's very pro-business, pro-corporation, pro-capital. And a large part of that is because of the power of propaganda and the Southern strategy that has convinced working class white people to vote against their interest and support people who are literally descendants of the Confederacy. Governor Tate Reeves, Dictator Tate Reeves, is a proud son of the Confederate veterans. Who, at least according to their own propaganda, are all about states' rights. But he is governing Mississippi into ruin based solely off of appeasing the president, right? The fascist in chief. So it's very important, it's very necessary to this proletariat revolution to organize this southern tri-state area, right? Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, because this is it. This is the three poorest states. This is the majority working class area. If we can get this coalition built across these three states of the working class, then we can do that across the country without, it's just copy and paste. You start in Mississippi, you start in the Delta right there, and you're able to get Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi right there. You just spread that out in that region. And before you know it, we have a national proletariat revolution, which can then aid the international proletariat revolution. And we go from there until, we either die in the struggle for the international proletariat revolution or we make it to the end. But, there is no end in revolution. You can't be a next revolutionary unless you join the oppressive class.
So one thing that I would like to mention talking about the oppressive class and kind of alluding back to what Christina was saying is, if you remember from the housing conversation, what has happened in the past, I don't know, probably since the 80s. I have the data that I'll post in the original that I've gathered. But so what's happened is that the bourgeoisie, like your petty bourgeoisie, I'm not even talking about real bourgeoisie, but like your petty bourgeoisie and your working class are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and getting closer and closer and closer together, which is what Christina was alluding to, right? When she was talking about feudalism, if you remember her icon, right? The overlords, the middle lords, and then at the expense of these people. Well, what's happened is towards the end, it's like Sam and them and like all that stuff we're talking about. These are people who know each other. These are people who are in some sort of relationship with each other. So one of the things that I would like to talk about as we're talking about this, we're going back to that mass line, right? And talking to those masses, is that we're going to be working with people who probably don't realize that they're actually part of the working class. Right? And so part of doing this work is not shaming people for trying to make a living, right? Because that's how deep the propaganda is like, I'm just here to get my check so I can go home and I can have a nice house and be with my family or whatever. That's not how we do that. What we do is we educate. We propagandize them. We radicalize them. We show them, like, we're not shaming you, because a great example of this is actually recycling, right? So I don't know if you guys recycle. I live in a collective of humans, intentional community. And one of the things that we try to do is we try to recycle. I'm also partnered with a farmer. And so we constantly are composting with worms and such. But one of the things that is happening is that one of the narratives that has changed over the past 10, 15 years is that, it was like recycle, reuse, you have the green bags with the 3 R's or whatever. But what people don't understand is, like, your individual recycling, it doesn't really affect that much. The number one waste maker in the world is actually the American military complex, right? And so the issue is not individual recycling is important, but that's not actually going to be effective change. So this is an example with these people who are in this like lower mid-level bourgeoisie kind of people. Them doing what they do doesn't make them horrible humans. I mean, there is no ethical consumption in capitalism. There's no such thing, right? And like DT alluded in his speech earlier, is like wherever you are, and like, okay, so obviously I'm a white human, right? So I have a certain level of privilege. But even DT as a brown Black human, right? Because DT is an American, DT still has privileges over humans who are from the global South, right? And so there is no ethical consumption in capitalism, right? So we are all, there's a work that I would like to allude to that I will drop in the comments, it's called Leopold's Ghost. And it's this concept of this human who's like trying to do the right thing and constantly trying to do the right thing. And he's like perfecting his factory and trying to make everything. It's in the Congo, and basically trying to like be a good person. And at the end of the short story, he's sitting there and he's eating his meal, and he's literally eating cannibalized humans, right? And that's the concept of like, regardless of how pure or whatever you try to be, right? That's the difference between like a liberal rhetoric and a leftist rhetoric. Is like, it doesn't matter how pure you're trying to be. The reality is that there is no ethical consumption in capitalism. And because there's no ethical consumption in capitalism, we literally are still eating other people's bones. Right. And so the only thing that we can do is to dismember this entire system. Right. And the only way to do that is by collaborating and working together. And the South has the power, has the history, has the rhetoric, has everything to really, really shake the foundation of empire. And so a great example also of this, and you know what? Our overlords know this. They know that we're powerful. Why do you think? Okay, so Memphis has one of the most brutal police departments in the country. Another thing is that Memphis actually has like an NPO complex and a collaboration of like nonprofits and rich like bourgeoisie humans called Memphis Tomorrow. And Memphis Tomorrow is actually an entire like shadow organization that funds lots of ventures. And one of the main ventures that they fund is the Memphis Police Department. Because they understand, so this is the way it works, is they want investors to come in and invest capital. So they want investors to so they want an environment that makes people feel safe to invest, right? And so the best way that they can make certain of that is that they have a brutal law and order system, right? And so this is how this works, is they understand our power better than we do, because their propaganda machine is like totally against us. And so part of doing this work is deeply understanding our power and doing the research and doing these collaborations, right? So we have literally in our like cadre of humans, we have humans from Mississippi and Tennessee and East Tennessee and Arkansas now, and we're like building this coalition of humans, or this federation of humans, that the whole entire of revolutionary humans, and the whole goal is to shut down this entire system. Yes, DT?
Also representing from the country of Panama.
Yeah, right. And so part of this work is doing this. And so this particular panel, I wanted it to feel more conversational. I wanted to ask questions. I kind of wanted to overview, and I wanted you to understand, like, we can get into facts and figures about Memphis and Memphis's power whenever we would like to, but I feel like you guys have all been given a lot of information today. And what I would like you guys to do is to sit in your body and remember your power, right? We have nothing to lose but our chains, right? One of my mentors says, we won't stop until all beings are freed from all forms of slavery, right? And that's what this narrative is, all beings from all forms of slavery, right? And so wanted to ask you if you have any questions, wanted to open up for whatever. And then I want to plug, but before I do that, I want to tell you the orgs that are represented. And then yes, so someone posted, those who do not those who do not move do not notice their chains, right? And so that's kind of in that same narrativization. So I want to plug the orgs that are represented today, and then also kind of give you next steps of what to do. And then I'm going to open up to questions. Actually, if you guys want to, you can actually raise your hand and ask questions on the panel to so that everybody feels like because this is a lot. We've done a lot of talking and a lot of analyzing, and I want you guys to feel safe to do that. Okay, so the org's representative is La Rosa Negra, which is an anarchist collaboration of humans. The American, oh gosh, I can't remember, I just lost it. So the Memphis Liberation Party, and Memphis Liberation actually is having a meeting today at 5:30 at the Levitt Shell. So if you guys can attend, that would be phenomenal. The PSL, which J-Dubs, Cole, and Basil and Morgan plugged, which is an amazing organization. Friendly Fire, and For the People, which is our comrade Haesung is a part of. And then we have the Wildfire Foundation, who is one of my mentors. And then we're dropping the website today. What we're going to do is we're going to separate all the videos, and so you can share them. They can be easily discussed and talked about. And so like you can say there's a topic that you feel like you need to go over, we'll have that particular video. Or you want to share a comrade that particular video, we'll have that ability to do so. Ways to get plugged in. The educational collaborative that J-Dubs and then we're talking about, it's every Thursday at 7:30. It's very, it's not quite introductory, but it's very embodied. We ask a lot of questions, a lot of interaction, a lot of human to human interaction. Also State and Revolution, which is a little more intellectual, more heady, that happens on Sundays. Every Wednesday and Friday and Sunday, those of us who are in Memphis are doing something called Tenants Organizing Together, right? And all that is involved is Wednesdays, we are going to the courthouse and advocating. We're rabble-rousing, we're passing out literature, we've got some lawyers that we're working with, we're trying to build a mutual aid network because the long-term plan is to build a sustainable mutual aid network here in the city that will cross state lines, right? So Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee, that will, whatever. Then we also have Sunday is canvassing for that, just to let people know like how to get involved. And like we even have some tenants. The whole goal is to get tenants to organize themselves. So right, part of that mass line that we were talking about is like, I'm not coming in and telling tenants how to organize themselves. I'm coming in and telling tenants, hey, tenants, you seem like you want some help. How can we help you? And then let the tenants lead and guide. Does that make sense? And then what we do is we introduce the pair to them and be like, do you like pairs? Okay, cool. Let's talk about, and let's do some dialectical pair discussions. And then Rev School. So we're actually going to host another one of these. And there are two separate categories. There's Rev School Skills and Rev School Ideas. This is Rev School Ideas. And then there's also going to be Rev School Skills. And skills are things like we talked about marshaling medics, combat, cybersecurity, all that sort of stuff that's what we're talking about in skills. And then we also have some underground stuff that if you're interested, you should be a part of, but I'm not gonna talk about it on Zoom. And let's see. Oh, and APL. Can someone remind me what the P stands for in APL? Because I'm a crazy person and I forgot. Could one of our comrades.
Yeah, everybody's got permission to speak now. So.
Oh, American Party of Labor. Thank you, comrades. And like I said, on the website, I will drop everything, all the orgs links that you can sign up for them, all the information that you can sign. We're going to have a contact link so that you can contact and sign up for stuff if you want to do it. Information on all the orgs, information. We're going to have the videos. We're going to have a reading list. We're going to have all the links that were dropped in the chat. Yeah, so if you want to be educated, we got you guys. We got you. So I'm going to open up to anybody who has questions or concerns oh, and one thing is that we are doing verbally. So just remember that this is a community effort. This is a collaborative effort. And so like if you guys feel comfortable, let's agree to not attack humans, but we can attack ideas if we feel so, whatever. And any other community guidelines, basically like, be a decent human being.
Basically.
Okay.
Also, real quick, since we're plugging organizations.
Oh yeah, Rebel Media.
Yes, Rebel Media Group. We are a grassroots independent media company here to propagandize for the people. We specifically center Black voices, but as you can see, we host events like these also to support and signal boost and amplify any of our comrades involved in the struggle for the people's revolution. Our website actually debuted today, so it's www.rebelmedia.group, and then you can find all our socials and stuff from there, as well as links to our podcast that I mentioned earlier.
Also, Rebel Media is in collaboration with us for like long term, so I don't know why I didn't plug them because they're like a part of our like pod rep. So, sorry. Okay.
But yeah, so that's us. Everyone now has permission to speak. So if you do have a question, feel free to chime in. Let's just make sure we don't talk over each other though. So first come, first serve. Des, I don't know if you're trying to say something, but you're muted. If so, oh, well, you're not muted, but I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can indeed.
Okay, so I just wanted to say thank y'all for this. I've been avidly listening all day, despite running errands. It's been fascinating and super informative, and I appreciate the variety of knowledge, the depth that y'all have gone to explaining things, and how accessible everything is. Because even though some of this is very high-minded, it was still easy to ingest. And it's going to take a lot of process, but I just wanted to let y'all know that I greatly appreciate it. And y'all all did a great job.
Well, thanks.
Awesome, definitely appreciate that. And then again, just want to remind anyone, we do know this was a lot, especially if you've been with us for the whole session. Even all us panelists are like brains leaking out of the ear. So we get it. We do want to say that in addition to, of course, having more of these panels and series of panel discussions, we do have the classes, the weekly classes. So feel free to reach out to us, any of us individually, about how to get there. Or also, I don't know if we have a Rev School email set up yet.
We do.
Hey, so you can, you want to get the email? So
yeah, I'll get it. I'll drop it.
So yeah, that'll be in the chat. Yeah. Let's see. There we go. So RevolutionSchool@mail.com.
Oh, thanks, Marissa.
Yeah, way to be clutch. Let's say thank you all our panelists. All right, so Kristen wrote in the chat, no questions right now, still absorbing. But thank you to all the panelists and the organizers for the time and work that went into this. Thank you, Kristen, for coming to join us and giving us your attention and time. I hope that it was beneficial to you. And whenever you're done absorbing, definitely feel free to reach out and decompress and discuss with us. Production is asking for my phone. Hold on, y'all. Let's see. Go ahead, Betty. You're about to say something?
Oh, I was just going to ask if anybody had more questions or concerns or issues or things that, like, since we have a little time, that you're like, made you think of this, that's kind of like a tangential thing, but you would like to have discussed.
One thing I just wanted to really quickly tag in on too is we're also looking to do a cop watch program in Memphis. There's also some stuff going on in Jackson. So if you're down in Jackson, we've got eviction, mutual aid, and cop watch stuff going on down there too. And so like still reach out, like even if you're not exactly sure, but you're intrigued or you're excited about what you saw. Like there are a lot of ways to get involved, and you'd be surprised too, like not even, you know, even if you're like, yo, I don't want to be on the front line of this, or I'm compromised position or something like that. There's still so many different ways that you can plug in with this group, or we can even hook you up with other groups, you know, depending on your interests. Like Don and Keisha both do Rebel Media Group, and Don and Keisha both do Refuse to Return, which is trying to push for educational equity and push against these unsafe reopens. He can talk more about that, but like there are a lot of different things going on that aren't just like, it's expansive and abundant is what I mean.
Yeah. So to add on to that, thank you for bringing up Refuse to Return too, Jeremiah. You would think I would, you know, bring up my own work, but too much like, right.
You got a lot on your, yeah.
So yeah, but that brings me to that point. So Refuse to Return is an advocacy group that, in addition to other things, is baseline demanding for safe reopenings of campus, right? We all know that there's a global pandemic going on that is particularly impactful to Black communities, indigenous communities, people of color, and again, not low-income communities, but communities who have been disinvested. So with that, and with the, yeah, it's tangent time. So with the public education system in general, right, you can see all of the gaps in this capitalistic structure. One of the universally accepted socialist programs that we have in this country, one of the longest running socialist programs that we have in this country, is public education. Even though it mostly exists to, you know, propagandize us to the American experience, it is still something that is accessible to everyone, and has been made increasingly so over the years. However, with that, you have a system that, because of lack of investment in these areas, school has become a frontline place for recognizing mental health issues, recognizing social service issues, so abuse, neglect in the home, of course, actually educating students, right? As well as all manner of development. So when you look at not only a lack of investment in this system, in the educational system, right? It's almost a running gag how little teachers are paid, despite having more professional training and development than any police officer on this force in this country. When you look at this kind of narrative and this myth, well, not even myth, right? But this narrative of the hero teacher, the self-sacrificial person who, despite being paid little and working a part-time job in addition to teaching full-time and interacting and investing in students outside of the hours of work, are still putting in their little pay to supplement classrooms and provide for students who may not have. Then you turn around and put these same people and these same students, these same children, I cannot stress enough that the teachers are primarily women, right? You know, there are obviously male teachers, shout out to J-Dubs, but the primarily women and children when you're talking about school populations. And they're being put on the front lines to be experiments in a global pandemic. Teachers who, again, are front line for all of these services, filling in all of these systemic gaps, right? For children, for the most vulnerable people in our community, are primarily left out of decision-making in schools. Most of the decisions, most of the policies that are implemented around curriculum, around returning right now, around pay, around discipline, are developed and devised and implemented solely at the discretion of politicians and administrators who, who may have never taught in the classroom, or if they have been removed from the classroom for years and or decades. So it goes to show the myth and these dialectical contradictions of capitalism and the capitalist experiment. You have the people who are in the front, who are most impacted by decisions. They have the least amount of decision-making power. You have a system that has been designed to serve the multitude, the masses, and to catch all of these gaps in lack of community development, right? But they also have the least public funding than damn near anything, especially in comparison to the military industrial complex, right? So yeah, I say all that to say, check out Refuse to Retire and sign our change.org petition, because we have a bunch of other demands in regards to educational advocacy, but it's real easy to get the masses involved with not killing women and children in a pandemic. I think that's something we can all kind of agree on, regardless of political positioning.
That shouldn't be political, but here we are. I wanted to answer someone's question in the chat regarding Operation Legend and like how are we going to get around that, because in Tennessee it's a federal offense for our Tennessee comrades. And I'm going to be really honest with you. So what has happened is that America has always flirted with fascism, as we have seen from Nate's talk. But the fascism that has been in the shadows, right? And Morgan talks about this, alluded to this a little bit, is that usually what happens, and Malcolm X talks about this, is that chickens come home to roost, right? And so what happens is that we try things out in the global South, and they go, and then they start affecting us in our hometowns, right? So the reality of the situation is that like Nazi Germany and their propaganda and what they did to Romani humans, homosexual humans, queer humans, you're right, that at that term they were called homosexuals, but queer humans, Jewish humans, whatever, that was imperialist stuff that was being done all over the global South, coming all the way back and starting to roost at the most vulnerable humans in that European subset, right? And so this is what's happening, right? Is the fascism that America has always had, the imperialism that America has always had and has affected the global South, is coming all the way around, and it has always affected frontline communities, particularly frontline communities of color, but not, I'll be honest, not to the degree that has happened in the global South, right? Like, right? And so we have and it's coming to roost. So the answer to your question is that these are the stakes now, right? That's the honest answer. Yes. Do we have teams that we're working with? Yes. We have some MacArthur lawyers that we're working with. Absolutely. Another thing is don't get caught. That's a huge one. But I don't want to be dishonest with any human who wants to be part of our federation of humans, of our communists and anarchists and radicals, and like our humans who are like, burn this to the ground. The answer, what?
Oh no, I was just gonna add into our groupings. My favorite is Coalition of People Who Give a Damn. So it's sure on a title.
Yeah. Yes. Coalition of Humans Who Give a Damn, right? Is that these are the stakes, and the fascism that America has always had to frontline communities in general and to the global South in specific is now coming home to roost. And you have to decide what is right for you and your family. And like, that's another thing, is that we have lots of layers and subsets. We have humans who cannot be in the streets for XYZ reason. Okay, guess what? We need lots of people to do data entry. We need lots of people, like, no, not to, what is it? J.K. Rowling is a TERF and we don't like her. But to quote Harry Potter, right? We need Molly Weasleys. We need people to feed the revolution, right? the Zabastas and the Russian Revolution was started by moms who were hungry because their kids were hungry, who were pissed off because their kids are hungry, right? So hunger is a real thing. And so part of this is doing the work and knowing each person where they are. And like, as long as we're all working towards revolution, it's cool, right? You know what I'm saying? So that's the honest answer to that question, is that don't get caught. We're working with lawyers. Decide your limits and boundaries. We're not going to shame you for them, but at the end, be aware that this is the cost, right? Like Fred Hampton did that.
And if I could just tag in on that too, Veda, like I've been trying to just insert this into any conversation I can manage to, which is like the circumstances that we find ourselves in are constantly shifting, and like we should not anticipate. I think people have said this around the pandemic, but I think there's a mainstream discourse that doesn't really want to say this about the fabric of American society and governance, but like the fabric of American society and governance is not going to go back to what it was. When we look at the economic collapse that's being forestalled right now, like Christina talked about a housing crisis, like the eviction crisis has been forestalled by an executive order as part of a political tactic by Trump. The mortgage and foreclosure crisis is still way down the road. Like we're not going to see that till next year, right? Because people are going to start foreclosing, banks are going to start foreclosing on homes of homeowners. So we're not just talking about renters. Now we're talking about homeowners. The COVID pandemic doesn't have any sign of abating. It's probably going to get worse in the fall. The election is going to be a nightmare. There's going to be no election day. The results are going to trickle in over the course of a month. We have trial runs right now of fascist militias in most major American cities and most places, especially in the Delta and in the Mid-South, that are running. They're running test runs. They're figuring out capacity. They're teasing the left. They're teasing liberals. And liberalism is coming up short. And so like whatever we thought we could do to affect change in this country when we pretended that it was a democracy tending towards a social democracy, that's not true anymore. Like the landscape has changed. So I would just encourage everybody, when you're calculating those risks, to take into account that like history is not static. History is moving all the time. And either you move with it or you get left behind by it. And so part of getting organized is being prepared for what's going to come, because what's happening right now is just a teaser. This is just a trailer. The fabric of our, massively inept and corrupt settler colony is no more. So something else is going to come. And so what's going to come? And are you going to be ready?
And the answer, and going full circle, I'm sorry to piggyback again, but to kind of go full circle, right, and kind of root this in the history, right, is that every time fascism comes into play is when a revolution has been smashed and there's a vacuum of power, right? So liberals typically smash revolution, and that what ends up happening is there's this scramble and exploitation and fear and whatever, and so fascists come in and they're like land and bread, or, like whatever, and boom. And because it's an exploitation, yep. And so this is what we do. And so like to go full circle on what Jeremiah said is like the only answer to fascism has always been the left. And that's the answer, right? And we love our liberal kin. We think reform has a place. But now is not the time to have that conversation, right? That's not the time. Why are you laughing, DT?
I'm laughing at Aaron.
Okay. So
I'm sorry. I'm my bad. I got ahead of myself.
Yeah. All that to say is that like this is not the time. This is not the place. We don't have capacity. The only answer is the left.
Just to kind of, I guess, add on to that, the concern for contact with this fascist state and with the prison industrial complex is valid. It's super valid to remain semi-censored. you know, we house, 75% of the world's prisoners. And on top of that, we saw in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, right? The COINTELPRO program, which was used to disseminate misinformation about Black radicals, and specifically to create apathy among white moderates towards the Black liberation cause. We see the apparatus of the state and how it was used to jail and or assassinate liberators in that same movement. You think of Angela Davis and Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur, who had to escape to Cuba. Tupac's mom, for those who don't know. And then Angela Davis, who was on trial for a murder that she didn't commit, and was facing the state of California, who Ronald Reagan was the governor at the time, and also Richard Nixon as the president, and defending herself. So just all the flowers, all the roses to Angela Davis, just as a visionary revolutionary leader. But these are things we've seen before. These are things that we'll continue to see. Radical revolutionary action will always be punished by the fascist state. It's something we have to be prepared for. It's something we have to be prepared to contend with. It's why we have to always maintain sympathy and awareness and consciousness for our incarcerated comrades, and make sure that we're providing assistance and reconnaissance for them, and advocacy for them, so that they can be protected while literally in captivity of this fascist regime, and be better able to organize and protect themselves from inside as well.
And to that same point, Don, like that we just got done with Black August, and I mean there are hundreds of Black political prisoners in our country right now, and that's also like one of the privileges that people living in the imperial core have enjoyed for a long time. And I call it a privilege. I mean, it's a dehumanizing thing, but it's a privilege in the sense that you don't get bombed every day, is that this kind of violence gets enacted elsewhere. This kind of state violence gets, and this goes to Veda's point about, and Morgan's point about the boomerang effect. You know, when I think about the template for American policing, and we were going to have, and hopefully we will have at some point, a Rev school that touches on the occupation of Palestine. But, you know, American police departments, the supervisors in those departments are getting trained in Israel, and they have been. The kind of state surveillance techniques, the kind of state quarantine techniques, the kind of imprisonment regimes and political, you know, squashing of political dissidents, that's been going on. They've been developing templates for that in Israel. And that's a settler state. I mean, it's actually like more analogous to the United States than a lot of other, you know, imperial projects. And so we not only know what's going to happen here, but also like we have to have that circumspection and solidarity to say, oh yeah, okay, like this is an illustration for us of what's been happening already. Like this isn't a new thing, you know, it's not new. Just to Don's point exactly, like we, for whatever personal reasons, we just haven't been galvanized in the way that we are right now. But the struggle has been going on in the way that it is right now for many people for a long time. You see what I'm saying? So we kind of like I think we have to try to work around the fear and work around the worry, because it's too late for a lot of people already. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people have already suffered under the boot heel of capitalism and imperialism, to the point that they died or were locked up for the rest of their lives. So it's kind of like we're in a position now to try to fight it. And if we don't, then who will, kind of thing. You know, it's that Reinhold poem from the Holocaust. First they came for the communists, then they came for, you know, then they came for me. So.
Also, kind of on that, we didn't even touch ecological issues, but I would recommend in my book drop, I'm going to talk about a book by Joshua Kahn Russell, who's the person who's a part of started the Wildfire Society. And basically it says organizing will cool the planet. And we're talking about fascism, we're talking about all this stuff, but we also have ecological responsibilities to organize, because the only way to cool the planet is to basically dismantle all these industrial complexes that are heating it up. And so not only do we have a duty, those of us in the Imperial Corps have a duty to our comrades and our kin in the other areas of the world, we also have a duty to, like, Hachimama, like our mother, right? Because imperialism has raped her long enough. There's that too.
Big facts. And that ties back to what Christina talked about this morning, and the concept of land ownership, and getting back to the indigenous understanding of that, right? Because you only have this kind of global destruction and devastation, this lack of respect for the earth, as a result of using land and viewing land as capital. To go back to radical leftist Jesus, money's the root of all evil, right? So pursuing capital above heaven, above the riches of the afterlife, right? That's what creates this evil towards the land. Not to do an altar call here at the benediction, but yeah.
Aaron, did you want to say something? I know Aaron wanted to talk.
Oh, my bad. Let me.
No, I didn't have anything. Sorry.
Okay, never mind then.
Well, to kind of add on to what Jeremiah mentioned about policing, right, and the evolution of policing in the fascist state. When you only get to the modern day police force as a result of essentially Reconstruction after the Civil War, right? In the North is where you get actual captivity, where you get the prison system, putting somebody in a cell. This isn't something that was practiced in the South or in the Confederacy, because you needed people to work, you needed slaves to work. You're out there working the field. It doesn't know if you're fucking in a cell, you cannot produce any cotton, any labor. But the actual policing, patrolling neighborhoods and communities to harass the people evolved from the slave patrols. So you have this combination to make the prison industrial complex of Northerners who would essentially hold organizers captive, and people who would disrupt the capitalist state captive in cells and cages, mixed with the slave patrols who would capture people who escaped from captivity and being kidnapped and held in chattel slavery, and returning them back to captivity to make your patrol force, right? This also feeds into the class betrayal that happened with your Irish descendants, right? Because they made up most of the police force in the North, when being a police officer was just going out to like beat up people who were messing with property, before there was this emergence with the slave patrollers. So when you're dealing with police, when we're dealing with policing as it has always existed in the American project, you're dealing with a system of violence, a system of oppression, and a system that's meant to suppress revolution. So it's best to be prepared for that. It's best to go ahead, Veda.
I just want to piggyback on what you're saying, DT, and also kind of add even go deeper into the history.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of the cop comes from constable on patrol. And so if we go even older, right, because we're a settler state, and like Morgan talked about, is like we're always about our mother country, right? We get our ideas from our mother country, right? Mother country. And so the constable on patrol literally, right, is the term sheriff, right? And so if you guys know the story of Robin Hood, this is a great going full circle about Mao and propaganda and storytelling, right? That Aaron was referring to is that stories teach truths. And so the Sheriff of Nottingham, right, that concept of Robin Hood is this idea of, right, they would steal from the rich to give to the poor. And what that was is, if you remember the story, is that Robin Hood was a hunter. And so the idea is that going full circle, that Christina's point is that the original system was a feudal system. So everything that you touched was the king's land, right? Everything was you touched. And so you could not hunt on the king's land. You could only hunt on your little square sharecrop feudal little whatever. And so what would end up happening is people would be starving and they would go into the king's land and they would hunt. And so they would go and hunt. And so what ended up happening is they had sheriffs who became constables, and their whole job was to protect the property of the bourgeoisie, and not even just the bourgeoisie, but the ruling imperial class, the ruling class, their property, right? Which goes kind of full circle of what we're talking about. So that idea comes to the United States, and it's full circle, right? The reason why the original chants of the Labor Party and the original chants of like cops was slave catchers, strike breakers, class traitors, right? That was the chant against cops. And the reason for that being is because literally these are humans who are working class humans who betrayed their class to try to get ahead. And what they were doing is they were protecting the ruling class's property. In the United States, that looked like Black humans, because Black humans were seen as property, right? And so it's all, and that's why, you know, that's why when in the current discourse, people are like, rioting, people are breaking property, how dare they? The cops had to. Well, it's because the cop class has always been about the protection of property. And so there's a direct correlation between property protection and cops.
Well, and to your point, Veda, I think that this discourse kind of came out at the beginning of the George Floyd protests, but has since faded a bit for people, or for the majority of people. But the discourse of being, this is not an accident, this is a feature of this isn't a bug, it's a feature of the system. Just a cautionary note about the potential of like social democracy or like social democratic reform. Specifically, like I went out and knocked on doors for Bernie Sanders. Like I'm all for it. I mean, Marx had certain ideas that we could vote in peacefully, socialism. But I think we've had it solidly demonstrated to us on multiple occasions in recent memory, not even just the long history, though, you know, if we look at the long history, it's also been demonstrated in the past that we aren't going to be able to reform our way into socialism or to vote our way into socialism. Like to Christina's point, like all these reforms look like equity. They never look like justice, because justice would be land back, right? Justice would be guaranteed housing. Police reforms, you know, adding body cameras or other accountability mechanisms, it's not going to do it, because police are fundamentally the protectors of private property in the ruling class. They assume an inequality. And so with all of these changes that we're talking about that really need to happen to get to a just world, to a world without the contradictions of capitalism, with obviously new contradictions, but without the existing contradictions that leave people, you know, dead in the streets, what we have to do is we have to abolish the underlying relationships that necessitate those structures. It's not enough to try to pursue a program of inclusive, home ownership. That's not enough, because that still assumes that some people don't own homes, because ownership implies non-ownership, and capitalism operates on a class of dispossessed people that they can then bribe or coerce with the money form into working. I mean, that's just structural. Like that's not hearsay or opinion. And the same thing happens with the police, where, a more humane police force is still a police force, and its job is still to protect property and to maintain existing social relations. So for us to assume that you could reform your way out of that is just a dangerous assumption. It can be a well-intentioned one. I'm not attacking people who've talked about those reforms. Those reforms can be a really active and important part of harm reduction, but it can't be the horizon of our political opportunities.
So to that point, right? My bad, y'all. I'm beating my face. Malcolm X said that our change, our revolution will come by the bullet or the ballot, right? Or ballot or the bullet. So I'm a firm believer, that Yeah. I think we should engage with the electoral process. It's illusory, but it exists to engage in some level of at least gauging where the people are, right? Regardless of the outcome, that's going to be who the capitalist class decides. You can see, we know Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump, right? Regardless of who's in office, we can see the numbers. So I think engaging with the electoral process is important as far as that, and as far as whatever harm reduction we can do in engaging with the capitalist class, with the ruling class. However, some direct action, some direct violent action is going to be necessary to truly overthrow the capitalist class and to engage in an international proletariat revolution.
Don't be afraid of violence, folks. Like, this is what this boils down to. That's why we are dialectical, right? The revolutionaries have to be filled to the brim with love, and also be wrestling with violence, right? And that's the dialectic of like love and violence, and how to sit in both those places.
So thank you for that relationship, right? So to cleanse our minds and our palates of J.K. Rowling being a TERF, I mentioned in the chat, right, Kay Applegate, who wrote Animorphs, very much not a TERF, her or her husband, two of the greatest sci-fi authors ever, but I digress. Cassie in the Animorphs, right? She was essentially the peacenik of the group. These are guerrilla fighters, like gauging in intergalactic war on Earth, that can turn into animals. Like that's their only thing. They can turn into animals for 2 hours at a time. She's the child of vets, the veterinarians. Jesus, I can't talk. So she's a big animal lover, vegetarian, the whole nine. But she doesn't hesitate to, turn into a wolf and rip somebody's throat out if that's what she's got to do. And we have to be the same way. We have to be loving. We have to be considerate. It's the only way you can even be on this side of the spectrum, is to have empathy towards your comrades, right? To people in whatever walk of life they're in. But also you have to be prepared to take a firm, regimented stand by any means necessary, to protect those comrades and to protect these ideals, right? Against a class and against a power that is coming with violence.
If I could just
come
on that exact point, Paulo Freire, who I talked about in my earlier panel or discussion, he talks about how like I don't know if y'all have ever heard this definition of racism, but like racism is not prejudice, because racism is power, right? It implies a system of power. And so racism doesn't work both ways. A black person can't be racist against a white person. The same thing is true of violence, according to Freire, and I agree, which is that the oppressed never initiate exists right now. It's poverty, it's homelessness, it's police brutality. And so I would encourage everybody, when they're thinking about rioting, looting, those kinds of things, to always ground in that initial violence of dispossession, displacement, racial, class, gender oppression, because that's the violence that should concern you. And anytime you hear somebody tries to troll you about the violence of revolutionaries, you should just go back, just ground in that and have faith in that. I know that has helped me to shape my response to the discursive and propaganda landscape that Aaron was talking about, which is to just pay that no mind. Those people don't know what they're talking about. They haven't read their history. You know what I mean? And just and keep it moving.
On the subject of violence, I read something really interesting recently, and I'm sorry if y'all are getting that feedback. Okay. On the subject of violence, I read something super interesting recently. It's an essay called Liberal Pacification and the Phenomenology of Violence. And it's actually written by anarchists. And it's about how a major task of the left is refocusing like the concept of violence from an interpersonal phenomenon, because you know a lot of people think of the concept of violence and they think about like a husband abusing his wife or something like that, or like it's one person on another. But it's a major task of the left to refocus the lens of what constitutes violence onto corporations committing violence against the planet, like mass systemic violence that capitalists are committing against the entire working class, so that people have an easier time conceptualizing like what is really the sort of violence that we should be looking at to call out and punish, instead of like interpersonal violence against each other. That was all I had.
Preach.
Heck yeah. So, and I think we want to think about wrapping, but I feel like that's a good place to leave, right? Because that is kind of something that can feel like a contradiction, is the consideration of deploying violence or using violence. And that comes, I think, naturally comes from being oriented in a place of peace, in a place of understanding, in a place of having empathy towards others. But as Jeremiah said, you know, these we're already in a state of being on the receiving end of violence. So to end that state, to change that positioning, that phenomena, it cannot be considered violence when you respond, right? If somebody comes up and breaks my arm with a baseball bat, you know, no one is going to think it outrageous, no matter how I respond. If I roll on the ground screaming and yelling and cursing, nobody's going to be like, sorry, can't call the ambulance because you're being too loud. And likewise, nobody's going to care if I use my other arm that's not broken to punch this person in the face. So we have to look at this the same way, right? And yeah, so without kind of going off into another tangent, I just want to real quick see if any of our panelists or even attendees want to weigh in real quick, give a word, a shout out, a thanks, or kind of highlight any parting thoughts.
Yeah, I just joined back in from the meeting, but yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I appreciate this. I'm really excited just for a new infrastructure for leftist education that is, you know, coming, that is coming from comrades, you know, from the South that know these conditions that we're facing here. Yeah, I'm excited, and for everyone that's, you know, come to check it, you know, everything out. Thank you all so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Basil.
All right, thank you so much, Comrade Basil. Any other panelists, any other attendees?
Hey, this is Esther. I've been in and out listening. I really have enjoyed this. It's been super educational. I'm excited that you'll have a website, because since I've been in and out, I definitely missed some things, but I know you said you'll be posting them even in sections, which is fabulous. What I would say is I'm a teacher, and so education is where I'm at, and I clearly feel like it's super influential. So anything pertaining specifically to, you know, public education that y'all could educate me on in the future, thinking about future sessions, would be very much appreciated. So this was really great. Thank y'all. Oh, and I just want to say shout out to Don Turner, also Jeremiah, for helping with Mississippi Teachers Unite, now Mississippi Education United. So we're trying to, I don't know, we got a lot of different people in there, but we're trying to just make it more and more people. And I'm definitely on the leftist side. And so I'm trying to get those people on my page. And yeah, anyways, so y'all are great. Appreciate the education.
Yeah, Esther's great people. Just want to tag in on that, and has been pushing a hard line in that group and in everything that she does. And if anybody is an educator or knows educators in Mississippi, or even, I mean, and I say educators in an expansive way, Mississippi Education United is like a really powerful group and a beginning. As Esther mentioned, like we're really, I shouldn't say we, all the hardworking organizers in that group are really doing a lot to try to get teachers organized and have labor power. And that's a big litmus test for the left, is like, how strong is your labor?
Yeah, to add on, excuse me, to kind of add on to that, shout out to Esther for real, because she's been front line with a lot of the organizing for the teachers in Mississippi, and low-key radicalizing a normally pretty passive group, or forced to be passive group through a lot of manipulation of the system, right? So a labor movement and or organization of teachers in the Mid-South, and especially in Mississippi, I think can go a long way towards a lot of other leftist ideals, and a people's revolution. So also to that point, I know Mississippi Educators United is more focused on people like who work in the school. Mississippi for a Safe Return to Campus is the Mississippi chapter of Refuse to Return. I believe there's also a Tennessee or Memphis group, and if not, I'm sure I can discuss starting one with some of the comrades here. But that's definitely community oriented, for teachers and educators, but also students and parents, and anybody just concerned with safe campus reopening during this pandemic. So we do a lot of organizing through there and kind of just sharing information, and partnering with other groups like Mississippi Educators United on how we can support. But yeah, so all right, any other panelists, attendees want to weigh in, say parting words? Going once, going twice. All right, sold. All right, awesome. So one more time, thank you so much, everybody, for your time, for coming to bless us with your attention, and also all my panelists for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom and your knowledge in a way to help people grow and learn and have greater understandings of the systems around them and their place kind of in those systems and ways that they can help engage in making the world a better place, quite literally. We appreciate you all for all that you do. Everyone be sure to follow Revolution School and follow Rebel Media Group for announcements on future Revolution School activities. I know personally something that I want to see in our next class, we didn't really have representation from the differently able community. So I think that's something we want to look into. I have a couple people in mind. And
we have some Latinx humans who are going to be doing the next teach as well. And I already have some disabled humans, or however you want to, fellow ACE, like I'm on the spectrum. So fellow humans like that are going to be in that as well. So
awesome. Well, and also just kind of supplement them not being here. If you have Netflix, Crip Camp, great documentary, check it out. But yeah, thanks again so much for everybody for hanging out with us. We will have the individual panels released via video throughout the social media pages and the websites. And then also there's already the Facebook Live that's been going the whole time. So you can go in there, fast forward, rewind, what have you. All right, so with that, everybody have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. Till next time, all power to all the people.
our power, all people.
Peace.